The organisation DebtBusters says its data shows the debt-to-income ratio for top earners is now at an all-time high. In other words, even those who are earning a fair amount of money are spending more of that money on paying back debt than ever before. That comes, as you know, everyone is battling in the current financial climate. Benay is the head of DebtBusters. Benay, good afternoon to you. How bad is it for people? How much debt do they actually have?
Thanks, Stephen, for having me on the show. This is our quarterly index, as you said, and we track the movements of the debt situation of the South Africans over the previous years. To answer your question, I think, our debt situation is probably some of the worst that we have seen over the last 10 years. You mentioned top earners. Basically, there are two things we track. One is what percent of their income on a monthly basis do they need to service the debt repayments that they have. And second thing we track is what is the size of their overall debt compared to their annual salary. For the first metric, we see that on average, people need 66% of their take-home pay to service debt every month. But for top earners, and also for the lowest earners, by the way, those earning less than 5,000 Rand, those earning more than 35,000 Rand, the ratio is identical, 71%. So that means 7 out of 10 Rand that they take home should be spent on servicing their debt repayments, which is not really sustainable.
So 70% is going to debt. And I mean, not all of that is houses and cars. It's all sorts of other debt that's built up over time.
Yeah. So, I mean, when we look at the overall picture, about like 30% of it would be for home loans, about 25% would be for vehicle finance, but almost about 50% is for things that are non-asset based. So almost half of it. And I think the difficulty here is that because the interest rates have gone up so much, we find ourselves in a situation where the cost of this debt, 3 years ago versus what it is now, it's very different. It's far more expensive now than it was before. And I think you can certainly see that in terms of the skyrocketing ratio of what consumers are expected to spend in terms of their take-home pay.
So you're in a position where you're paying a large amount of your salary every month just for debt. So you don't have anything at the end of it. All you do is pay your debt. You don't come out of it with an asset, generally speaking.
Yeah, unfortunately, we see the situation for our lowest earners. Like we said, they have to spend about 71% of their take-home pay, and there are very few of them who have assets. And I think that just highlights the expensive sort of, interest rates, the high interest rates and the expensive credit that we have in South Africa. In fact, when we look at let's call it the unsecured debt, which is a combination of personal loans, credit cards, and the like, we saw that the average interest rates for that, for consumers who come to us for debt counseling, it's gone from 20.9% towards the end of 2020 to 24.8% currently. Now, that just becomes far more expensive for the consumer to service, and it simply is not sustainable.
So then people get into a cycle. Once you're in that cycle, and it's a very difficult cycle, is there any way to get out of it?
I think people are in the cycle at the moment because of two things. One is the interest rate increases have been so severe and so sudden, if I may call it that. I mean, again, going back to give an example, bondholders on average were paying 8.3% per annum interest rate 3 years ago. Now they're expected to pay 12.2%. That doesn't sound like a lot, but actually that's more than 50% higher than what you would have expected to pay. That's been significant. The other driver has been that their salaries haven't really budged. If you compare the last several years compared to inflation, we've actually gone backwards as a country, unfortunately, in terms of disposable income. So, to answer your question, how does one get out? I think my answer is always the same. One, look at what you're spending money on. Look at your credit score. In terms of what you're spending money on, find out what are the smallest items that you seem to be spending money on. And generally, these are repeat purchases. And what are the largest items? And if you find that the largest item you're spending money on happens to be debt repayments, I would certainly encourage consumers to talk to debt counselors and see whether, they can help them. If it's not that and there's other things, talk to others and try to get advice on how you can cut back on expenditures.
There's some hope, perhaps some signals that interest rates will start to come down next year. How big a difference will that make?
I think it will make a significant difference, Stephen. I mean, as we said, we don't expect the interest rate to go from the current level immediately to what it was in the 2020 level. That's not realistic. But I think any percentage decrease in interest rate, right now it's been holding steady for the last 3 months or so, since the end of May. But any decrease will certainly create relief for our consumers. And I certainly hope that, by the time we speak this time next year, we should be in a better state. We also have to recognize that while inflation has been not really increasing as much as it did up until the last, 12 months, it's still a significant thing. So if that also eases up, I think in a year's time, the consumers should find themselves in a much better space when it comes to disposable income.
There's some indications that food price inflation will still stay above 10% at least until the end of the year. But since the start of the pandemic, Benay, interest rates went all the way down, and then really did go all the way up. But it just seems that everything has got so much harder, so much tougher. We're seeing terrible stories coming out of some provinces of people battling just to get enough food for themselves and their children. So with interest rates, with other things that are happening, do you believe there's a little bit of light somewhere at the end of the tunnel, and that light isn't just another train?
I certainly hope so. I think the way that we see it is, at DebtBusters, we help thousands of consumers. But the reality is these are consumers who actually want to do the right thing. They want to do the responsible thing. They want to take, responsibility for repaying back their debt. And I think you will find that by and large, the South African consumer sits there. It's just that the interest rate increase and inflation has happened so suddenly and, unexpectedly, that we found ourselves in a situation where we cannot cope. By the way, let's also add the impact of load shedding, which has been a reality since last July 2022. It's been really significantly impacting, many people's ability to earn incomes. And I think if all of those three things, inflation, interest rates, and load shedding, if they ease up by next year, I think we certainly will be in a much better state. I think we are more hopeful in terms of where we're going to be by the time next year than we are today.
Benay, thank you, Head of DebtBusters. Really do appreciate the time.